I think it's pretty safe to say that the MPC is one of the biggest players in the sampler game. The classic machines that started it all were so impactful that they had a profound effect on both the music and the music makers of their time. Today, modern MPCs have expanded the platform even further, adding a bunch of features and plugins that have made it become a standalone powerhouse. But what if I told you that one of its best features has seemingly flown under the radar for a very long time? And not only that, if you already own an MPC-1, Live, Keys, 37, or an X, you already have it available to you right now without even having to buy it as an add-on. It is perhaps the most useful and, at the same time, underrated feature on the whole device, as it allows you to take your entire studio with you anywhere you go, or even better, make a copy of someone else's synth. I'm talking, of course, about the autosampler. This little gadget will automatically grab an external instrument and through the power of MIDI and audio recording will create an entire multi-sample instrument of any given patch in a matter of seconds. In case you're not familiar with the term multi-sampled instrument, or why it's a big deal that the MPC can make them automatically, let me briefly explain the general idea behind the whole concept. If you were to grab a sample and put it into a sampler like the MPC or the Octatrack, you should be able to pitch shift it and play it chromatically. Now, of course, depending on that sampler's algorithm, this sample will start to distort and deform in certain ways as you move further up and down the octaves from the original pitch. This is a very basic function of pretty much any sampler and can yield some very cool and unexpected results. However, you don't always want those artifacts and imperfections. Sometimes you just want to be able to play the instrument that you wanted to copy while staying as close to the original as possible. Usually in that case, what can be done in certain keyboards and workstations like the OPXY and the Roland Phantom is that you can record multiple samples of an instrument in different keys and then distribute them along the keyboard so that you pretty much get an actual copy of said instrument without the artifacts. And that is what is known as a multi-sampled instrument. The problem with making a multi-sampled instrument, generally speaking, is that the process is slow and very tedious. That is especially true when multi-sampling organic instruments like a guitar or a cello, where you have to play the same note multiple times and in multiple ways to get the full spectrum of what the instrument can do. And that is why high-quality sample libraries are so expensive. Thankfully, with synthesizers and plugins, you can use MIDI to do all those variations for you. And that, my friends, is where the auto sampler comes in. So let's have a quick rundown of how this thing actually works. First, you need to have an external instrument connected to the MPC through MIDI and audio so that it's receiving MIDI from the MPC and so that the MPC is receiving audio from that external device. Right now I have my Arturia Polybrute 12 just off camera connected and ready to be multi-sampled. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new track and I'm going to select MIDI. Then I'm going to go into the MIDI out ports and boop. Since I'm using USB, it'll actually detect the name, so it's much easier than just using the 5-pin MIDI. Now I have my Polybrute 12 hooked up and ready to be sampled. Now I really love this patch on the Polybrute, so let's make a multi-sampled instrument out of this one. You get access to the multi-sampler by just going into the sampler page and pressing this little button, those keys with the plus sign, right there. And now you're in your auto sampler. Now we can select the audio inputs. So I know that this is coming in through 3 and 4 because I want it in stereo, but you can also select mono or whatever you want. So now we go into the note ranges. Note range C1 to C4 is telling you how low and how high in the keyboard you're going to sample. Since this is a sample that I plan to use in the mid and the high ranges, I'm going to give it a little bit more extension into, let's say, B6. On the other hand, if you're sampling something like the Sub 37 for a deep bass, you might want to sample lower octaves and maybe cut out a few of the higher ones so as to keep the file a bit smaller. The next important parameter is the note stride, and that's going to determine how many notes it's actually going to skip between the ones that it samples. You could sample 1 for 1, but it's going to end up being a huge file, so it's not really necessary. For example, in note stride 6, that should mean that it samples this note, then it skips 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it samples this one next. And that would make all of these notes in between time stretch adaptations of said note. Of course, the less the note stride, the more exact the instrument, but bigger the file. And the bigger the note stride, it's bound to have more artifacts and not sound as good. But let's say, okay, note stride of 4, because the next thing we're going to do is add layers. Now, these layers of velocity are very important if your synth has lots of expression. So for example, I could layer this in 2 layers with just 127, which is maximum velocity, and then let's say 64, or or let's say 60, which should be around medium velocity. That should be enough for most, but this can actually let you layer up to 8 levels of velocity, which comes in very practical if you want to sample, for example, an analog drum synth. Next up is note length, and that's how long this little robot is going to keep that note sustained. So for example, I have 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to let go. Now that's really important when you're sampling a patch that has lots of evolving sounds, and that way you don't miss out on all the nice textures. Now the tail is how long it's going to keep on sampling after you let go of that sample, which is also important for things with long release or a nice reverb, maybe an effect that you put in there. After that, you can actually start kind of mangling this because you can decide how that sample is going to behave itself in the instrument, like for example looping forwards, or you can make it go alternating or in reverse. Then you can also have these X fade and X fade type, which is basically so you don't get any clicks and pops. Next is the auto trim start, which is a real lifesaver because you don't have to go looking for each start of each one of the samples. It'll do that by itself. Now, one that I like to do is make current track. So immediately after it's done sampling, I can just go ahead and play this. Now, down here, you get the information on how long this is going to take to sample. Right now it's 48 seconds, which is pretty decent. If I wanted to sample this, like for example, with a 2-note stride, look at what's going to happen down here. 96 seconds. If I start adding velocities, of course, it's going to get longer and heavier. I'd recommend using the velocity and note strides sparsely because they can result in massively sized folders of samples, so that's not very practical when they end up being these huge bloated behemoths. Less is definitely more in this case, and I try not to get too greedy with the amount I sample, just enough to make it work. After that, you just press do it, and this thing will get to work. And now the instrument is automatically loaded in. Now you will notice we don't exactly have an envelope. We have lots of samples, but it cuts out immediately. So now we're going to go into Program Edit and start messing around. So first of all is I'm going to go to the amp envelope. Now be careful and select all. If you don't select all, it'll just modify the envelope for certain keys. I mean, you may want that, but generally speaking, I want this to be global. Another thing that's really cool is that we can now choose whether to keep the patch just like the original, or we can actually start tweaking it with things like the MPC's LFOs and the effects, things like filters, LFOs. You also have unison mode and harmonizer. You can basically have a lot of fun with this. Now this has other creative applications as well. Like for example, let's say you wanted a polyphonic sub 37. You can just multi-sample that instrument in and voila. Polyphonic sub 37. If you want the sample folder for the multi-instrument that we just made, head over to my Patreon and you can download it for free. And while you're down there, please consider joining. I have an amazing community on my Discord and everyone is always welcome. I'll leave a link down below. Now finally, if you want to save this multi-sampled instrument, for example, to take to another MPC or another device, you just go into Menu, Save, and go ahead and save the key group. This seemingly simple feature has been a lifesaver when I want to keep a patch from a synth that I'm about to let go of, or if I want to take my set on the road, but I don't want to haul around a huge or delicate analog synth around with me. The possibilities are truly endless, and if you have an MPC, I urge you to give it a try. If you're still here and you enjoyed this video, please remember that you can greatly support my channel with something as simple as clicking the like button, subscribing, or leaving me a comment, even if it's just to say hi. If you want to see another unusual and amazing way to use your MPC, you might want to check out this video right here. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week. See you next time.